If you live in an American city, you've probably asked yourself some version of this question. Why is everything so expensive? Rent keeps going up, buying a home feels nearly impossible, groceries cost more, gas costs more, even just existing in a city feels like a financial stress test. And almost every time this conversation comes up, we're offered the same explanation. It's just supply and demand. Not enough housing, too many people, build more, and prices will fall. But here's the thing. American cities didn't just accidentally become expensive. They were shaped, slowly and deliberately, by more than a century of planning decisions, public policies, and financial systems. So today we're going to unpack why American cities are so expensive and why the real answer isn't just economic, it's historical. To understand where we are now, we need to start with what supply and demand explains, and where it stops explaining very much at all. Supply and demand isn't wrong. If more people want to live in a place than there are homes available, prices go up. That's always been true. In the late 19th and early 20th century, American cities grew rapidly. Industrialization pulled workers into cities, immigration increased population, housing was dense, mixed use, and often built incrementally. When demand increased, cities responded by building more housing quickly and cheaply. But that system didn't last. Over time, American cities deliberately stopped allowing housing supply to respond naturally to demand. Not because demand disappeared, but because politics, fear, and property interest reshaped how cities were allowed to grow. To understand why supply became constrained, we need to look at the rules that decide what housing is allowed to exist in the first place. That brings us to everyone's favorite topic, zoning. Modern zoning emerged in the early 20th century. Cities were crowded, industrial, and unequal. Factories sat next to homes, tenement housing was overcrowded and unhealthy, zoning was introduced to separate land uses and improve public health. But almost immediately, it took on another role. In 1916, New York City adopted the nation's first comprehensive zoning code. Other cities quickly followed. By the 1920s and 1930s, zoning became a tool to protect property values and control who could live where. Single-family zoning spread across the country. On paper, it just regulated buildings. In practice, it regulated people. Apartments, boarding houses, and smaller units were associated with immigrants, renters, and lower-income households. So cities outlawed them in large areas. By mid-century, most residential land in American cities was legally reserved for one house per lot. This locked cities into low density, just as demand for urban land began rising again. And zoning wasn't the only constraint layered onto housing. Over time, additional regulations quietly raised costs, even when housing was technically allowed. After World War II, American cities entered a new phase. Car ownership exploded. Federal highway funding reshaped metropolitan regions. Suburbs expanded rapidly. Planning adapted to the automobile. Cities began requiring parking for nearly every new building. At first, this seemed practical, but over time, parking requirements became detached from reality. Each structured parking space can cost between $30,000 and $60,000 to build. That cost didn't disappear. It shows up in rent. Even if you don't own a car, add minimum lot sizes, setbacks, height limits, and years-long approval processes, and housing becomes slower, riskier, and more expensive to build. Small local builders disappear. Housing production becomes dominated by large capital-intensive projects, which leads to a question people ask all the time. Why does everything new look like luxury housing? When people complain about housing today, this question comes up again and again. Why is everything new considered luxury? The assumption is that developers simply prefer wealthier tenants, but historically that wasn't how American cities worked. For much of the late 19th and early 20th centuries, housing was built incrementally. Small builders added homes one lot at a time. Property owners converted larger houses into apartments. Courtyard buildings, duplexes, and triplexes filled neighborhoods. These homes weren't marketed as affordable. They were just normal. Their affordability came from three things: Land was cheaper relative to income, construction was simple, and these housing types were legal almost everywhere. That changed after World War II. As zoning codes hardened, entire categories of modest housing were banned. At the same time, the process of building housing became slower, more complex, and more expensive. Environmental review expanded, public hearings multiplied, legal risk increased. None of these changes were inherently bad, but together they raised the cost and uncertainty of building housing. Small builders disappeared. Only large firms with access to capital could survive multi-year approval processes, and when projects take years to approve, developers can't afford modest returns. They have to maximize revenue per unit. That's what luxury really means. Not marble countertops, but high rents needed to cover expensive land, long timelines, financing costs, and regulatory risk. In other words, luxury housing is often just new housing in a constrained system. Meanwhile, older housing, once affordable by default, becomes scarce and highly competitive, which pushes pressure downward onto the rest of the housing market. And this connects directly to how American cities expanded outward instead of upward. To understand modern housing costs, we need to talk about capital. In the mid-20th century, most housing in the United States was owned by individuals. Homes were places to live first and investment second. That began to change in the late 20th century. Financial deregulation, tax policy, and globalization made real estate attractive to large-scale investors. In 1960, the US created Real Estate Investment Trust, or REITs, allowing housing to be treated like stock. By the early 2000s, housing had become embedded in global financial markets. Pension funds, private equity, sovereign wealth funds, capital from around the world flowed into American cities, especially those with strong legal protections and long-term demand. To global investors, housing wasn't primarily shelter. It was a safe place to store wealth. Capital behaves differently than households do. Investors can wait. They can hold property vacant. They can accept short-term losses for long-term appreciation. When global capital competes for limited urban land, prices rise even without population growth. And when zoning restricts new housing, scarcity turns speculation into a winning strategy. This doesn't mean investors are the sole cause of the crisis, but it does mean housing prices now respond not just to local wages, but to global financial conditions. To fully understand housing costs, we need to zoom out. After World War II, the United States made a massive bet on suburbanization. Federal mortgage programs favored single-family homes. Highways were funded at an unprecedented scale. Transit systems were underfunded or dismantled. Urban renewal cleared dense neighborhoods, often communities of color, to make room for roads, parking, and office districts. Jobs decentralized. Retail followed highways. Housing followed cheap land. Suburbs appeared affordable, but they were heavily subsidized. Roads, utilities, and infrastructure were paid for collectively, while land value gains accrued privately. At the same time, cities made it illegal to rebuild the density they had destroyed. So when demand returned to cities in the late 20th century, urban cores couldn't respond. They were constrained by zoning and surrounded by regions designed for low density. People faced a trade-off. Live far away and pay in time, transportation, and access, or live close and pay higher housing cost. This is why affordability isn't just about rent. Transportation is often the second largest household expense. Sprawl didn't eliminate costs, it redistributed it. And because sprawl strains public budgets, it limits cities' ability to invest in transit, public housing, and basic services. Urban planners inherit this history. Zoning written decades ago, infrastructure designed for cars, housing markets shaped by global finance. Planners can make meaningful changes, like legalizing more housing types, reducing parking mandates, planning density near transit, supporting public and social housing. But planners don't work alone. Housing affordability reflects political priorities, what we choose to subsidize, what we choose to restrict, and what we leave to the markets. American cities aren't expensive by accident. They are expensive because scarcity was written into the system. through zoning, through infrastructure, through finance, through decades of policy choices. But that also means the outcome isn't inevitable. If these conditions were planned, they can be planned differently. Moving toward affordability means changing direction, allowing more housing where jobs, schools, and transit already exist, legalizing the housing types cities once built naturally, reducing incentives that reward speculation and vacancy over use and stability. Some countries treat housing as essential infrastructure, investing directly in supply and limiting speculative pressure. None of this removes the private market, but it changes the balance. Ultimately, the cost of living in cities reflects choices. Understanding those choices is the first step towards changing them. If you want to keep unpacking how planning, policy, and power shape everyday life, my name is Jasmine. This is Understanding Urbanism. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.